Hey everybody, Todd Vandermeide, former NRA contract lobbyist, Illinois gun law guru, and welcome back to this edition of Suck Less Saturdays on Freedom Steel. Before we get going with today's topic, want to say a heartfelt thank you to all the people out there who have contributed to my grandson's GoFundMe page for his medical issues and the seizure disorder that Nathan is going through. And my family, my son, my wife, we all just are just overwhelmed with gratitude for the graciousness that you all have showed us. So with that, thank you very much once again. But now, let's get on to today's edition of Suck Less Saturdays. And why am I using that term? Because it's one of those things that, you always want to try to suck less in general, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just doesn't seem to have that within their capabilities. So, by now, pretty much all of you have heard about the Cali Mag ban being ruled unconstitutional. And I would say a large number of you have heard that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has reached, the en banc panel has reached down and plucked this case out of what would normally go to a three-judge panel. So let's do a little history and review here. Duncan challenged the Cali Mag ban, goes in front of Judge Benitez. Judge Benitez issues a decision saying the Cali Mag ban is unconstitutional, issues an injunction. We have Freedom Week, millions of magazines pour into California. They go to a three-judge panel. There is a stay put in place. And then with that, three-judge panel rules in favor of our side and upholds Judge Benitez. The state appeals again, goes to the en banc panel. Now, in California's district, because of the geographical area it covers, is so large. There are 51 judges currently listed for the Court of Appeals. And with that, it's too large to have an en banc or a full court review of the three-judge panel. So what I am told from my associates in California, that the chief judge gets to hand pick the panel. So here at the time, you had Justice Sidney Thomas was the chief judge. And so they set up an 11-judge en banc panel. And that panel, it was Sidney Thomas, chief judge, Susan Graber, a Clinton appointee, Richard Perez, a Clinton appointee, Marsha Burzon, I can't remember where she's from, Sandra Ikuda, a Bush appointee, Margaret Murguia, an Obama appointee, Paul Watford, I think a Clinton appointee, Andrew Hurwitz, an Obama appointee, Ryan Nelson, a Trump appointee, Patrick Baumate, I think a Trump appointee, and Lawrence Van Dyke, a Trump appointee. The decision was 7-4 in favor of overturning the lower court three-judge panel decision. This case was then appealed by our side to the Supreme Court of the United States, and it sat up there as the court heard New York. And after the court ruled in New York, saying text, tradition, and history, remember that, we'll get back to that in a little bit, was the proper way to look at the Heller decision, and that interest balancing was no longer an approach to be used, and never was an approach to be used in the Second Amendment. They then granted review of this case, vacated the en banc panel decision, and remanded it back to the lower court for further proceedings consistent with New York. The en banc panel then kicked it down to the three-judge panel. The three-judge panel then decided to kick it back down to Benitez over dissent. Judge Benitez, a week and a half ago, issued his decision, once again finding the California mag ban unconstitutional, and in doing so issued an opinion in line with the New York methodology spelled out using text, tradition, and history, and just ripping to shreds the state of California's justifications. From there, he gave a 10-day stay and said, hey, I'll give the California Attorney General's office a chance to appeal. They filed that appeal. And in a very unusual move, in a very controversial move, the Court of Appeals, not the three-judge panel where it should go back to the three-judge panel that found in our favor before, but the en banc panel has now reached down and plucked this procedural motion from the court, because we're not hearing the merits of the case. Right now, this is a procedural motion on should there be a stay on the injunction that Judge Benitez has ordered. That's all it is. Not on the merits, not on anything else. Should the law be enjoined, or should the law be enforced as the appeals in this case make its way through the system? And in a highly irregular move, it's not completely unheard of, but it's probably the 0.01% of moves on this issue. And the en banc panel has reached down. Now, there have been two changes. Change number one is Sidney Thomas is no longer the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. However, Mary Murgua, I can't pronounce her name, but who was on the panel previously, is now the chief judge. And so the other one is that Paul Watford, who was on the panel, has since retired from the judiciary and has been replaced with another Clintonista appointee, Judge Wardlaw. So those couple of changes have taken place. But what's interesting here is that the Ninth Circuit en banc panel has now issued an extended stay till next week sometime, where they have asked for briefs from both parties as to whether or not a stay should be granted and how to look at this. And I believe that Michelle and Associates has filed a briefs objecting to the stay, saying the injunction should go in place, and moving on this. But what's really interesting, what is just super got people talking, it blows my mind. And it's why I'm going to ask the question, is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals more corrupt than the city of Chicago? So let's dive into this. First off, the en banc panel has granted a 1-week stay to allow for briefs. Now, Judge Hurwitz, who was on the original panel, sat there, and this is telling, because he's not a fan of the Second Amendment, but he wrote a 1-paragraph concurrence. The only thing the court does today is grant a 1-week administrative stay that effectively extends the stay ordered by the district court while we take up the state's emergency motion for a stay pending appeal. Despite the rhetoric from my dissenting colleagues, this temporary stay evinces no more disrespect for the Supreme Court or the Second Amendment than the district court stay issued by a judge who found the California statute unconstitutional in order to give the state sufficient time to seek a stay pending appeal. I therefore concur in the order granting the stay. Now, he's kind of playing this down a little bit, I think, because of what comes in the next two dissenting opinions of the granting of the stay. I think there's going to be a lot of chatter and a lot of, maybe not emails to leave a paper trail, but there's going to be a lot of conversation going back and forth. So Judge Bomate, who wrote a dissent from the reversal of the 3-judge panel prior in the en banc panel, writes another dissent here. For over a decade, our court has improperly interest balanced our way around the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court has had enough of it. See New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. In Bruin, the Supreme Court made clear that the Second Amendment must no longer be deemed a disfavored right. With the clear direction from the Supreme Court, you might think our court would return to regular order and handle the Second Amendment case like all others before our court. And in the normal course, emergency motions would be handled by a three-judge panel. But not here. Because this is a Second Amendment case, we now take the unprecedented step of taking an emergency motion as an en banc panel in the first instance. While our rules may leave room for such an unusual step, discretion and wisdom counsel against it. Indeed, to my knowledge, no en banc panel of this court has ever handled an emergency administrative stay motion as an initial matter, and the majority cites no precedent otherwise. So I'm left wondering why we rush to do something so unorthodox. I thus respectfully dissent from the granting of the administrative stay. Such a decision should be left to the sound judgment of the three-judge panel. And this is where the rubber really hits the road with Judge Van Dyke dissenting. I share Judge Bumate's concerns about the irregularities created by this en banc panel's all too predictable haste to again rule against the Second Amendment. Apparently, even summary reversal by the Supreme Court has not tempered the majority's zeal to grab this case as a comeback, stay the district court's decision, and make sure they, not the original three-judge panel, get to decide the emergency motion and ultimately an eventual merits question in favor of the government. I think it is clear enough to everyone that a majority of this en banc panel will relinquish control of this case only when it is pried from their cold, dead fingers. Gotta love that one. And I think it clear enough to everyone why. And this is where it gets real juicy in the inner workings of the court. There is a phenomenon that has long been recognized in abortion cases, sometimes called the abortion distortion, that describes courts' willingness to jettison procedural norms or other normal rules of decision-making when a case concerns abortion. As the Supreme Court recently observed in Dobbs, abortion cases have led to a distortion in legal doctrines ranging from severability to First Amendment doctrine. And Justice Thomas has likewise decried the troubling tendency to bend the rules when any effort to limit abortion or even speak in opposition to abortion is at issue. I'm going to omit the cites here on these things. The abortion right recognizes that the court's decision is used like a bulldozer to flatten legal rules and stand in the way. The entire injunction in this case departs so far from the established course that our jurisprudence that in any other context it would have been regarded as a candidate for summary reversal. But the context here is abortion. Abortion exceptionalism has all too often meant the rules are different for abortion cases. Carolina Mala Corbin, Abortion Distortions. It's a legal, looks like a legal paper. So he goes on, after Dobbs, we can no longer engage in those abortion distortions, or at least we shouldn't. Cases involving the Second Amendment in our circuit have unfortunately suffered from a like phenomena. And just as we should no longer distort our rules in abortion cases, we should no longer apply different rules to different constitutional rights. Whole women's health. Thomas dissenting. We should not give Second Amendment cases special treatment. But the current irregularities highlighted by Judge Bumate's dissent are not the only way this case continues to demonstrate our court's enduring velocity toward the Second Amendment. The irregularities in this case run much deeper. Here comes the meaty part. Indeed, all the way back to when this case was first called en banc, this en banc panel was born of illegitimacy, and this case should never have been taken en banc in the first place. Whoa! After the three-judge panel first issued its opinion in August of 2020, One judge on our court requested 5.4b notice in 3 cases, including this one, but then inadvertently missed the deadline to timely call the cases en banc under our clear rules. That could happen to any judge. But rather than simply accepting a result dictated by our rules, or even deciding as an entire court to waive our rules, we went in a different direction. First, the decision was made by someone, not by the rules or even the entire court, to allow the respective panels to waive the deadlines on behalf of the entire court. So here they're playing fast and loose with the rules. He's saying someone. Something tells me that would be the chief judge, if that's how the court works. To continue. Then the campaign started. Earnest conversations were had, hearts were poured out, tears were shed, and pressure was applied to the panels with mace-like collegiality. So there was a whole bunch of backroom dealing going on to get this to go forward. God. And in the end, a discrete collection of judges, again, not the entire court, struck a compromise, circumvented our own rules, and allowed the en banc call to move forward. But only in this one case. The agreement was made to call this case, but drop the en banc calls in the other 2 cases, including a death penalty case. Priorities. So here, they knew they were going to set a set of rules that would be the precedent for the other gun cases following up. The fix was in. They didn't have to call the other cases. It wasn't a real compromise. Oh, we won't call these other cases en banc. We won't do this, because they were going to put the fix in. They were going to sit there and set a precedent that would set the tone as to how 2A cases were to be viewed by the lower courts in this circuit. Let's go on. A lot about this is deeply troubling. First and foremost, we have rules for a reason. We operate under them every day. They should apply equally and consistently unless and until we change those rules in the normal course. There is no exception for, quote, cases that some of the judges on our court really, really care about, end quote. And that would be capricious and erode external and internal confidence in our court. If we lack the temerity to codify the Second Amendment exception in our en banc rules, we should have refrained from employing it behind the double veil of, quote, internal court matters, in which only some members of the court participated. Second, because we have clear, settled court-wide rules, a discrete group of panel and off-panel judges interested in en banc rehearing shouldn't have been permitted to circumvent their rules on their own. So here you even had judges who were not selected for this panel having an input on how this case was supposed to be handled. See Ninth Circuit General Order 12.11, but no judge tendered a Rule 12.11 request. Instead, it was handled off the books by a handful of judges. Wow! Sounds like the city of Chicago City Council. He goes on, which makes it even worse. This off-books approach allowed the would-be en banc advocates to pressure the panels to be collegial and simultaneously conceal these conversations from the rest of the court. It also delimited the scope of the question to whether we would bend the rules and allow some exceptions in 3 specific cases, which prevented the entire court from considering the weightier question of whether, as an institution, we should be suspending our settled rules for, quote, particularly important cases, end quote. Such agreement, however procured, does not somehow confer legitimacy. In sum, not only is our court treating this case special now, but the process that brought this case en banc in the first place was illegitimate from the start. That's a hand grenade right down the middle of the aisle. This demonstrates and perpetuates this court's anti-Second Amendment posture. rewards the weaponization of one-sided collegiality and damages the internal and external integrity of the court. How are we to uphold the rule of law and reassure the public we're doing so when we disregard our own rules and make questionable decisions like this behind closed doors? The story of the Second Amendment in this circuit has been a consistent tale of our court versus the Supreme Court and the Constitution. That tale continues today and will continue as long as a number of my colleagues retain the discretion to twist the law and procedure to reach their desired conclusion. As uncomfortable as it is to keep pointing that out, it is important that the public keeps being reminded of that fact. Wow. That is just a blockbuster of a accusation. It reminds me that during the oral arguments on the Dobbs case, this quote made a lot of rounds back in November 2021. Will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts? I don't see how it is possible. Justice Sotomayor, during the oral arguments of the Dobbs decision, or Dobbs case. So Justice Kagan oversees the Ninth Circuit. One would think that this has got to be sending shockwaves through the judicial legal community in the federal courts. Certainly, Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and even the Chief Judge can't not be made aware of this. So what is it? I mean, should the Duncan plaintiffs we can't get a fair trial, therefore pitch for the shadow docket? I would think that if this court plays any more games, anything they do at this point forward is now turned into it's called questionable. It's all absolutely questionable. But let us take a little divert. Here, I'll stick on this. But so how do we get a fair shake? I don't know. Is there an ethics complaint that could be filed about how this whole thing was handled? Everybody's always had a feeling that something dirty was going on. And there's been this feeling that Second Amendment advocates don't get a fair shake in a lot of the higher courts. And obviously what Justice Van Dyke wrote, some people think this is really, really important. Forget what the law says. Forget what the Constitution says. Forget what the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has told the lower courts to do. It goes back to Heller in my favorite passage out of page 63. We know of no other enumerated constitutional right subjected to a freestanding interest balancing approach. The very enumeration of that right takes out of the hands of government, even the third branch of government, to decide if the right is really worth insisting upon. Now, and they ignored that passage for years. So, Dick Durbin, or Durbin the Turban as I like to call him, is real big about talking about judicial ethics. He's been berating the Chief Judge and then calling out, Thomas and Alito and others. But here you clearly have packing of the court, fixing decisions ahead of time by, a bunch of judges who aren't acting like judges. They're acting like lobbyists. You want to talk about those politically smoke-filled rooms, back rooms where all the deals are cut. That's what Justice Van Dyke just laid out. So, I don't know. There's a massive barrage of phone calls and emails to Dick Durbin, say, hey, are you going to investigate this with the dirty dealings on the judges that were Democratic appointees? Are you going to look at that? was the chief judge the one that pulled the strings on this early on? Because, Justice Van Dyke references a single person. The only person I would think in this hierarchy who could have the moxie to pull that off would be a chief judge. And now you've got the new chief judge, Murguia, Murguia. I can't pronounce it, but she's now the chief judge. Was she complicit in all of that? Was she there? I mean, she was on the panel. What role did she play in all this? And what role is she now playing as the chief judge? Because does Justice Thomas, is this something like out of the Bourne Identity where we got to go back in and clean up the mess that we started a couple of years ago? I don't know. This has got a lot more questions and creates a bigger problem for them. And I think we have venues to push on. I mean, shouldn't Senator Grassley, Ted Cruz, some of the other Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because right now the Democrats are at a slight disadvantage with DIFI being dead and gone. The numbers in the balance of the Senate have shifted ever so slightly. If Senator Menendez ducks out, I don't think he will, because then the numbers really shift in the Republicans' favor. But can you imagine? I mean, shouldn't Ted Cruz and our Republican allies within the Senate who confirm the judges start pounding the table and demanding an inquiry? If Justice Thomas speaking engagements and things like that are to be questioned, that it isn't the bending of court rules and doing it literally off the books, it isn't to achieve a desired outcome in a type of case. Isn't that worthy of a Senate investigation to look at all this? That's just mind-boggling. I've got some more information I want to dive into here, but this video is running long. It's knocking on 30 minutes. I don't want to do that to you guys because not everybody has this kind of time. So we'll do a part 2 on this here relatively shortly. But as always, guys, 1, thank you again for the generosity towards my grandson. 2, please like, subscribe, comment, leave stuff below. I try to get the comments whenever I can. And copy and paste this link and share it throughout with all your social media, your friends, the forums you're on, and the like. And we'll get to part 2 of this Duncan debacle. And is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals more corrupt than the city of Chicago? It's looking that way in my eyes. But as always, frag out.